All right, let's get started here. And my name is Evan Wiener, and my background's radio. Most of my professional career was in radio. And I've done TV, worked in newspapers, worked for magazines, give talks, but the majority of my life has been in radio. So this is a talk that's kind of near and dear to me. And we're coming up to Halloween, and October 31st is Halloween. But on October 30th, 1938, there was a radio show on. It was called The War of the Worlds. And the next day, the newspapers, this is the Chicago Herald-Examiner, Radio Fake Scares Nation. And remember the date, it's October 30th, and I know when I was a kid, October 30th was referred to as Gate Night, or Egg Night, or Mischief Night, the night before Halloween. And I know that just a few years ago, my house was egged on October 30th, so apparently it continues to this day. The early days of radio, the Orson Welles War of the Worlds. And it's based on this book that was written in 1897 by H.G. Wells, and the 1897 book becomes a radio show. Orson Welles' Mercury Theater on the Air had been on CBS for 17 weeks. It was a low-budget program, didn't have a sponsor, but the series did have a small and loyal audience, and they were doing fresh adaptations of the classics. Classics like Bram Stoker's Dracula, which kicked off the series on July 11th, 1938. Wells said, "I had conceived the idea of doing a radio broadcast in such a manner that a crisis actually seemed to be happening." And back in those days, a lot of radio stations had big band shows. WLW in Cincinnati, every Saturday night, their big band show, their girl singer was Doris Day. The Glen Island Casino over in New Rochelle, be the Dorsey Band or Glenn Miller Band, and NBC would broadcast it across the country. So music shows were a big deal back then. And basically what this show was, we start the show with music, and then we interrupt with a bulletin: the Martians have landed in Grover Mills, New Jersey. They're there. Why Grover Mills, New Jersey? Why not anywhere else but Grover Mills? And this is the set, and you got the actors around the microphones. You have Wells, you have the conductor of the orchestra. And that's basically it. It's a little radio show, a very little radio show. But this is what happened. The number one, number two, number three radio show that year, depending on the week, was Edgar Bergen, remember him? Or Charles McCarthy. Okay, that was the number one show. And that show was an hour-long show, or a half-hour-long show. And it came on a half hour before Wells' show. And it ended a half hour later, and they were in the middle of this show. At the beginning of this show, Wells made an announcement: here is the drama for the week, The War of the Worlds. So a lot of people missed that because they were listening to Edgar Bergen, and the top three shows of that year were the Edgar Bergen show, the Kate Smith show, and the Jack Benny program. So here you got this little show with a couple actors, some musicians, and the Martians are invading the Earth. Wells and his Mercury Theater on the Air performed a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, converting the 40-year-old novel into fake news bulletins, describing a Martian invasion of New Jersey on October 30th, 1938, Gate Night, Gate of Hell Night, Devil Night, Mischief Night. And they were going to have a little mischief, although it's not apparent to the audience. About 15 years ago, I did this talk, and there was a man who was late 80s, early 90s at the time, and he said, "I remember that." I said, "What do you remember?" He said, "Well, we were living in Princeton, New Jersey, and Grover Mills, New Jersey is about 10 miles away from Princeton." So he says his father gets them all together. They get in the living room, and they have a plan to attack the Martians. They're all going to go into the garage. Somebody's going to get a rake. Somebody is going to get a shovel. Somebody's going to get something else. And those Martians come near them, going to hit them over the head. That's what they were going to do. They were 10 miles away. So they thought they were going to be invaded by the Martians in a few minutes. Some listeners mistook those bulletins for the real thing, and their anxious phone calls to police, newspaper offices, and radio stations convinced many journalists that the show had caused nationwide hysteria. Now, the actors on the show, when they didn't need to be on the show, went to the switchboard at CBS to assure people that this was nothing more than a radio drama. That's all it was. Don't worry about it. It's just a little form of entertainment. Afterward, Wells was 23 years old there. Looks a lot older, doesn't he? He's 23 years old. And he's discussing the radio show with newspaper reporters. First 2/3 of the 1-hour broadcast was presented as a series of simulated news bulletins. Sounded real to some, like that guy in New Jersey's father. According to Radiolab, about 12 million people were listening when Wells' broadcast came on the air, and about 1 in every 12 thought it was true, and some percentage of that 1 million people ran out of their homes. That constitutes a major freakout. Federal Communications Commission decides it better investigate what happened that night to see if any laws were broken, which is kind of odd. What laws could have been broken? Nothing. But they found no laws were broken. The networks, which were CBS, NBC, and the Mutual Broadcasting System at that time, and I helped close Mutual Broadcasting back in the late 1980s. I know the last employer shut off the lights. The networks agreed to be more cautious in their programming in the future. Now, this broadcast put Orson Welles on the map. And Hollywood studios decided we need this guy to start writing screenplays. Well, his next major product, something you might have heard of, Rosebud, Citizen Kane. He went from this radio series, and he got a lot of control from the movie studios. The next thing he wrote, Citizen Kane, which came out in 1941. And this is what they were after, a Martian, Marvin the Martian, Warner Brothers cartoons. He can speak and he doesn't have a mouth. I don't know where it came out of. Welles, at the end of the broadcast, cleaned it up. He said, "This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as a holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet, jumping out of the bush, and say, boo!" That was that. But it showed how powerful radio really was. And at the end of the day, it was just a show. But if you go to Grover Mills, New Jersey, let's say 17th, so 2 weeks from yesterday, October 30th, you go there, they're going to have a big party in town. And this is the centerpiece of the party, a monument to a show that meant nothing in the long run. The Martians coming, Orson Welles here, and the families huddled up together like that, afraid. But they're going to have a big party in Grover Mills. At the end, it was a radio show, but it showed you how powerful radio was in 1938. Some people took it seriously. The annual celebration is October 30th, remembering a pre-Halloween non-event, Orson Welles' radio show. 87 years later, they still celebrate it. Nobody else does, but they still celebrate. I have a friend who was a teacher of communications in high school at Spring Valley High School in the 1970s. And he played this for, in those days, they're now in their 50s, these people, 14 and 15-year-olds. And he said that they were laughing at it. They couldn't believe people took it seriously. So anybody watch a radio like that?
No.
You watched the radio. What were you watching?
I was watching television.
Well, no, but she watched. What were you watching on radio?
The Inner Sanctum.
You were watching The Inner Sanctum. This girl's sitting there listening to radio.
There was nothing to watch.
But there was nothing to watch, yet people were fixated by it. And the reason is pretty simple. I worked at a radio station
But you
called...
pay more attention?
Yes, you pay more attention. I worked at a radio station called WGRC Radio when I was 21, 22 years old. And every Sunday at noon, we had a block called Early Days of Radio, or Radio, the Theater of the Imagination. And we always had Jack Benny shows because there were plenty of Jack Benny shows. We'd somehow have Inner Sanctum, The Shadow, Burns and Allen, and a whole bunch of other shows from those days. And it was called the Theater of the Imagination, just for what you said. You had to concentrate. You don't have to concentrate on TV like you have to concentrate on radio. And so I concentrated in those days listening to the Jack Benny show because there were so many sound effects that sounded so real. Now, I'm doing this talk again about 10, 15 years ago, and this woman said to me that she used to listen to Inner Sanctum when she was a little girl with her sister. And she said the best way to enjoy Inner Sanctum was to shut the lights, listen to it in the dark. And so the radio's in the living room, they shut the doors to the living room, they shut the lights, and they're starting to listen, and they start to scream. Now they're about 7 or 8 years old. The parents walk in, and they're saying, "What's going on here? What's going on? Why is there all this screaming and all this other stuff?" And one of the girls said, "Well, the best way to watch Inner Sanctum is with the lights off." They never watched Inner Sanctum again or listened to Inner Sanctum again with the lights off. But you have to imagine what was going on. And they were imagining what was going on, screaming until their parents ended that. This is Newfoundland, and this is where radio starts. Up in St. John's, Newfoundland, the first transatlantic wireless transmission from Cornwall, UK to St. John's, Newfoundland took place on December 12th, 1901. Marconi placed his receiver at Signal Hill, that's in St. John's, near the closest point to Europe and North America, a distance of about 2,100 miles from St. John's, Newfoundland to Cornwall in the UK. Marconi picked up the signal. Now this is my Grundig radio, which I don't play anymore. It's from 1951, and the reason I don't play it anymore is it's got tubes in there, and if a tube blows, well, it's a conversation piece. But it had shortwave, it had FM, it had AM, and until the 20 years ago since I played it, it was still a perfectly fine radio, and I could get Radio Bulgaria on the shortwave through it. United States Radio was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia on October 14, 1912. David Sarnoff was in the right place at the right time. Sarnoff managed the Marconi wireless station at Wanamaker's department store in New York City. Remember Wanamaker's?
How can I forget
How
John
could you forget?
Wanamaker?
Yeah, so Wanamaker's was in Philadelphia,
It's a
New
very
Jersey.
nice store.
Yeah, Manhattan, and over here in over there in Yonkers.
There's a medical school in Halifax called Dalhousie.
Yeah.
When they were not letting fellows into medical schools.
Oh, okay.
My brother went.
You went to up
Nova
to
Scotia,
in Halifax.
to Dalhousie.
Yeah, Dalhousie.
You've heard of it?
I passed it. It's off
Then you
Barrington.
know.
It's off Barrington
Then you
Street
know.
there. Anyway, that evening the Titanic struck an iceberg not far from Halifax and sank. That is David Sarnoff. And David Sarnoff is in the right place at the right time at the Wanamaker's plant, rather at the Marconi plant in Wanamaker's. Almost immediately, the ship began transmitting distress signals. Soon, the airwaves flooded with the news of the disaster as operators tracked the rescue effort. Sarnoff went to Wanamaker's, oversaw a crew of telegraphers for the next 3 days. They published the names of the survivors of the Titanic tragedy. After 3 days at his Wanamaker's post, he went out to Coney Island, the Seagate station that Marconi had, and he contacted the steamship Carpathia, which picked up the survivors from the Titanic. Returning to New York, he proceeded to compile the names of these passengers, forward the news to their families. And there was Sarnoff at Wanamaker's, not necessarily that day, but there he is. In 1915 or 1916, Sarnoff wrote the music box memo which he proposed the development of a commercially marketed radio receiver for use in the home. 1919, the Radio Corporation of America gets the Marconi radio station from the U.S. Navy. That is 8MK in Detroit, and that is the first newscast ever in the United States. It's not a commercial radio station. There were no such things as commercial radio stations in August of 1920. But it makes its debut August 31st, 1920. The station was owned by the Detroit News. On November 2nd, 1920, the George Westinghouse Laboratories, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, KDKA Radio 1020 on the dial, which is still there today, became the world's first commercially licensed radio station. Its first program, the Harding-Cox presidential election returns. The announcer was Leo Rosenberg, and he delivered the results starting at 6 o'clock. Radio comes of age in 1921, in July of 1921. There's a big fight in Jersey City. 91,000 people are here. This place is called Boyle's 30 Acres. It's a temporary stadium, and Jack Dempsey is fighting Francis George Carpentier. David Sarnoff had it all figured out for RCA to sell radios. All you need was programming, music, news, and sports, and he arranges for that fight. The fight takes place on July 2nd, 1921. It generated the first $1 million gate, $16 million today. 91,000 people showed up in Jersey City. And the radio pioneer RCA arranged for the live coverage via KDKA radio, and it was the first national or international radio broadcast. It was heard in Canada, heard in parts of Mexico, heard out to the Rocky Mountains, probably down to Bermuda, and into the Caribbean in Latin America. And there's Jack Dempsey. Dempsey, at that point in his life, was considered a draft dodger. He did not serve during World War I. He said he was his family's sole breadwinner, which meant half of the people went to see him, hoping that his head would be knocked off, and the other half was rooting for him, like Muhammad Ali. He wins in 4 rounds. That's not the big news of the day. The big news of the day, people bought radios, or radiolas, because of the fight. The first fight ever on radio featured this guy, Johnny Ray, not the guy who sang Crime, Johnny Ray. It was April 11th, 1921, and it was on KDKA in Pittsburgh, and Johnny Ray and Johnny Dundee.
I think he wants the aid.
Okay.
Ask him.
Yeah. Okay, hold on one second. There's nobody here.
She must have gone to put on the
You'll-
movie.
Yeah.
She'll be right back.
Okay,
might
here
have
she
put
is.
on the
Here
movie.
she is.
I don't hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, he needs you. Anyway, so it's at Pittsburgh's Motor Square Garden.
I'm not sure. I think he needs-
Harold Arlen was the first announcer, and announcers used to dress like that. They're on radio. They're on radio. Yeah. And you dress with a tuxedo on.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
He's on
Oh,
radio.
Harold Arlen.
Yeah, he's on radio. That's not the songwriter. This is a radio announcer, Harold Arlen. It's August 5th, 1921. The first broadcast of a baseball game was made over Westinghouse station KDKA. Harold Arlen was the announcer. His grandson pitched in Major League Baseball with San Diego, 1969. Warren Harding had a radio installed in the White House. You are supposed to turn this way, but again, he's watching radio, and there he is. November 5th, 1921, Harding made history when he sent a radio message over RCA Radio Central's relay network from the White House across the world, and acknowledgments of the message came from to Riverhead, New York, where they were received from Australia, Japan, and 15 other countries. Harding installed the radio in the White House on February 8th, 1922. Almost 2 years later, Calvin Coolidge, who followed Harding, was the first president to have an address from the White House. That was Washington's birthday, February 22nd, and it was heard coast to coast on 42 stations. 1923 World Series was on WEAF 660 in New York, which is WFAN now. It was once WNBC, once WRCA, and there's only one reason it was on. People wanted to hear about Babe Ruth and what Babe Ruth was doing. By 1924, the box, or the radio, or radiola, had sold about 83 million units, which would be about $1.5 trillion today. Radiola cost anywhere between $25 and $275. Today that would be $460 to $4,700 for the top-end radio. First radio program broadcast from a presidential convention took place on June 10th, 1924, the Republican Convention in Cleveland. Radio's big news story during that two-day convention, Calvin Coolidge was nominated as for the Republican Party for the presidency of the United States. And there's Coolidge, and couldn't use that car up in his home in Vermont if he went there during the winter. That's where the speaker was, outside the car. The night before the 1924 election, Coolidge made history when the largest radio audience ever tuned in to a broadcast of his final campaign speech. Coolidge won the election, and on March 4th, 1925, Americans listened for the first time to a president take the oath of office on the radio. ATT leaves. That is an old replica radio that I have in my house. ATT is out, RCA is in. In July 1926, AT&T decided to exit the broadcast field, sold its entire network operations to a group headed by RCA, which used the assets to form NBC. And there is NBC Red, three little tones, boom, 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 which means I love you. If there was a...
It's not the singing,
NBC. Yeah, NBC Red. Now, if there was a fourth tone, that meant there was a lot of trouble somewhere in the world. And that fourth tone was used on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It was boom, 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 boom. NBC Red, flagship network with established shows and advertisers, included radio plays, mysteries, adventures, detective series, soap operas, quiz shows, variety hours, talent shows. Now, a guy like me, I'd be working for NBC Blue, which had sustaining shows, news and public affairs programming. And that is NBC Blue, which would eventually become ABC. Headlines, remote reporting, sidewalk interviews, which we called Man in the Street, and panel discussions, and weather reports, and farm reports. That's all part of NBC Blue. This is William Paley. He's the chairman of CBS in his later years. 1927, he becomes involved in radio because his father, Sam, decides to buy a radio station in Philadelphia called WCAU. So he invests, William Paley, in a small radio network, the Columbia Phonographic Broadcasting System. He becomes president of Columbia September 26, 1928, moved to New York City, and signed up 49 radio stations. How many of you remember old Stoneface?
Stoneface?
Ed Sullivan
Stoneface.
Show.
Ed Sullivan. Now, my cousin was Jerry Stiller of Stiller and Merrick. Ben Stiller is my cousin. And Jerry and I talked a lot about old Stoneface. And he said that Ed was always about making money. But while he was always about making money, there was something else going on as early as 1932. See, Ed Sullivan introduced people to the world besides Elvis and besides the Beatles. The Ed Sullivan Show is an American old-time radio program. More precisely, its name that can be applied to any one of four Ed Sullivan shows in 1932, 1941, 1943 through 44, and 1946. The first three radio shows, they were on CBS. The last one on the NBC Blue network. Now, his first program was described as a series of gossipy talk and interview shows. He was a gossip writer for the New York Daily News, and it was known for introducing people to a radio audience. Among those who made their radio debuts and introduced to a nationwide audience, Jack Benny, Irving Berlin, George M. Cohan, Jack Pearl, who was a Broadway actor, Florence Ziegfeld. The first show ran only in 1932, from January 12, 1932 to August 18, 1932. So long before he introduces the Beatles to America, he introduced Jack Benny. Long before. So this is the 1920s. This is how you listen to a radio. You had a headset, you plugged it into the radio, and the whole family could listen to the one station that you could share equally. The radio stars of the 1930s. That's Ed Wynn in the middle. How many of you have heard of Ed Wynn? A comic back in the day. He's the first vaudevillian ever to host a radio show back in 1922. Some of the other people that are on the cover of Radio Stars magazine: Rudy Valley, here Rudy Valley, Mert and Marge, and the only reason I know about them is that Bugs Bunny talked to one of the characters in the cartoon. Kate Smith, Paul Whiteman. You know who Paul Whiteman is? Paul Whiteman, the big band leader, who dared George Gershwin to write a composition for his Lincoln's birthday celebration at Carnegie Hall. And Gershwin in 4 weeks came up with this little ditty called Rhapsody in Blue.
Oh my God.
Oh my
Okay.
God.
Yep. It was written on a dare, literally. Seth Parker, who was an actor in those days in Burns and Allen. The Goldbergs, Molly Goldberg, Philip Loeb on the CBS radio network. Oh, Rochester, oh, Dennis, and there is Jack Benny with Mary Benny and Eddie Anderson Rochester. If you're an opera fan and you turn to NBC, you might hear Toscanini and the Metropolitan Opera. George Gershwin might show up on the Rudy Valley Fleischman show and play Fascinating Rhythm. It's possible he would show up. Amos and Andy, two white guys playing two black guys on the radio show that lasted a very long time. And Burns and Allen. And Fred Allen, who had a face made for radio. And the Babe Ruth and Graham McNamee. And Kate Smith, her radio show was one of the most popular radio shows of its time. And Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. And Bob Hope, you know who the guy playing the trombone is?
Jerry Colonna.
Jerry Colonna.
Oh, God.
Jerry Colonna.
He was
I'd be 125 years old now.
I know.
Jerry Colonna,
Sorry.
there he is. Jerry Colonna. Armed Forces Radio, this is Frank Sinatra performing for Armed Forces Radio. How many of you saw Funny Girl on Broadway? Well, there is Funny Girl. Fanny Bryce is Baby Snooks. And Barbra Streisand was the sixth choice to play her in that play in 1964. The first choice was Mary Martin. And she loved the show, she loved the treatment, she loved everything about it. But she told the producers, you need a Jewish girl. I'm not a Jewish girl to play that part. Anyway, there is Jack Armstrong, Wheaties, played by Charles Flynn, the All-American Boy. The Inner Sanctum, Raymond Johnson, ghostly host of the Inner Sanctum Mystery on the air Sundays, 7:30, KXOK Radio. It's an NBC Blue Network show. Guiding Light, before it was on TV, was on radio. The Sunoco Show. Every city had a big band show, or more than one big band show. It depended on the city. You could be in Chicago and have dozens of them, New York dozens of them. This one is on NBC Radio. The Sunoco Show goes on the air tonight and every Tuesday evening at 9:30, 8:30 Central Time, and it's on WJZ in New York, WBZ in Springfield, Massachusetts, WVZA in Boston, WJR in Detroit, WBAL in Baltimore, WCKY Cincinnati, KDKA in Pittsburgh, WHAM in Rochester, KYW, which is now in Philadelphia, but it was in Chicago, and CKGW. Your hit parade. Lucky Strike, LSMFT, means fine tobacco. They sponsored your hit parade. The Grand Ole Opry, which was in Nashville. That is the newer building, the old building I went to when I was in Nashville about 25 years ago. I figure I'm in Nashville, might as well do the tourist thing. But I found out Grand Ole Opry was great. I loved the Grand Ole Opry. And I was there for over 4 hours that night. That's at the church. But this is the Grand Ole Opry. It's an American weekly country music stage concert radio show out of Nashville, Tennessee. Started on November 28, 1925 by George D. Hay as a 1-hour barn dance on WSM, which stood for a slogan for an insurance company. In 1939, it debuted on NBC Radio. Up in New Rochelle, the big band era at the Glen Island Casino, NBC set up shop there, and you could hear Jimmy Dorsey or Glenn Miller or Tommy Dorsey and dance the night away, and that was a network radio show. And then, of course, you had the dark side of things. This is Father Coughlin, the Detroit area Catholic priest who hated Jews, absolutely hated Jews. Every week there was an anti-Semitic script. He had a magazine. One of the magazines said, "What do we do with the Jewish question?" And he was on WGAR out of Cleveland and WJR out of Detroit. His sermons aired on Sunday. They featured populist, anti-communist, and anti-Semitic claims. In a country of 130 million people, it is claimed that he had as many as 40 million people listening to him. He linked Jews to the creation and spread of communism, an ideology he hated. He also frequently utilized literary and religious references to spread anti-Semitic stereotypes. And this is his magazine, the Social Justice National Weekly. This is February 27th, 1939. The lead here is The Jewish Question, What to Do with Jews. And that's Father Coughlin. Although it had been proven as a hoax, Coughlin published the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, an anti-Semitic pamphlet purportedly proving evidence of international Jewish conspiracy to control the world in multiple issues of his magazine in 1938. Well, how does Eddie Cantor fit into all of this? Eddie Cantor was a great entertainer. You knew Susie like I knew Susie. Apparently he knew Susie really well, very well. Or Making Whoopee. He also wrote Merry Melody's theme song, the cartoon song, Merrily We Roll Along, or The Merry-Go-Round Broke Down. The Merry-Go-Round Broke Down. Well, here's Eddie Cantor. He's about 45 years old in 1939. He's at the New York World's Fair, and he publicly denounced Father Coughlin, and then he's dropped by his radio sponsor, Camel Cigarettes.
Oh my God.
He was off the air. He was off NBC because he had no sponsor. He returned to radio in 1940. After Jack Benny vouched for him, they wouldn't do anything wrong. Coughlin was kicked off radio by church decree in 1940. Camel decided it was safer to side with Father Coughlin than Eddie Cantor. Gertrude Berg was the most she was the most talented woman ever, or the most talented person ever in radio. She was born Tilly Elderstein in New York City in 1898. Her father, Jake, ran a resort in the Catskills Mountain. Can you imagine a Catskills resort in 1912?
No.
1912. But she was there. She worked and eventually created and performed skits to amuse the guest children. She met an this is the Catskills. Anybody ever go to singles weekend up the Catskills? Nobody? Singles weekend.
No, but
Not singles, but the Concourse
Yeah.
was the only hotel that had night tennis. They
Oh.
were lit up, and that's why we went.
Oh, you went there. Well, my
Because their
wife's
courts were lit
yeah.
up at night.
Yeah, my wife sung there for the High Holy Days back then. I spoke regularly at Kutcher's, yes.
my mother sang in a lot of those
Oh.
in the 30s and 40s.
Oh, but anyway, so I never went up there for singles weekend. My wife did. And I said to her, so what was it like? She said, I met you. Also, I was talking to Mrs. Kutcher one day. Dirty Dancing was about the Catskills. And I asked Mildred, I said, where was Dirty Dancing done? She said that was Jenny's place, Grossinger's.
Oh.
So anyway, so she's a single woman, and she meets an older older English gentleman by the name of Louis Berg at the resort. He woos her, and when she turns 18, she gets married. She moves to New Orleans, and we should never hear from her after that, because her husband had a good job. He was an engineer on a sugar plantation, but it burnt down, and that gave her a chance to come back to New York. And she decides she's going to be an actor, and she is going to write. She changed her first name to Berg, her first name to Gertrude. Her last name is Berg, and she began writing radio scripts about a fictional family of Jewish immigrants assimilating to America. Wait a second, she's living in East Harlem, where there were 6 synagogues at the time. All of her neighbors are Jewish. Just how fictional was this? Maybe exaggerated a little bit, but I doubt that The Goldbergs was a fictional piece of work about a Jewish family assimilating to America. If you're growing up in it, which she did, you went to the Catskills, which she did, and she's in New York, how fictional could it have been? Anyway, so it was called The Goldbergs. Her mother's maiden name was Gold, her husband's name was Berg, and it's The Goldbergs. And there she is. It premiered in radio in 1929. She filled the role of Molly. She had no intentions of playing Molly Goldberg, but she didn't find anybody. One week she's sick, she's not on the show, and NBC gets stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of letters asking, "Where's Molly?" Oh, there she is, except she's in front of a CBS microphone.
She made a
In
fortune.
1936, she signed a
fortune, I
five-year,
know.
$1 million contract, which is worth $21.5 million today, to sign with the sponsor Procter & Gamble. By the end of the decade, she was making $7,500 a week to produce, write, and star in her own radio series. During the height of her radio program, she was the second most respected woman in America in the 1930s. Only Eleanor Roosevelt was more respected than Gertrude Berg. That's Aviva Kempner. She is a documentary maker, and among the documentaries she's done, The Life and Times of Hank Greenberg, the Major League Baseball player Mo Berg, who was a member of the OSS during World War II, who went to Germany in 1943 to find out how close the Nazis were to building an atomic bomb. Yes?
What is OSS?
That is a
Organization of Strategic Services.
Yeah, it
What
was
was that?
a spy agency. It was a spy agency. The predecessor of the CIA.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, and she's done other documentaries, and I said, Aviva, what's your favorite documentary? Yoo-hoo, Mrs. Goldberg. She wrote and performed an original sketch for WNBT TV, Channel 1, the NBC station in 1940 in New York. She considered a live version of The Goldbergs as a means of testing its visual appeal on Broadway and on TV. World War II came about, so there was very little TV between 1942 and 1945. The Goldbergs left radio in 1946. So she makes the transition to television. Several years later, her 1948 play, Me and Molly, made its Broadway debut, lasting 156 performances, long enough to convince Gertrude Berg that it was time to move to television. The Goldbergs premiered on CBS in January 1949 to critical fanfare and significant acclaim. But what goes up must come down. That's what Isaac Newton said after the apple fell on his head. Gertrude Berg was the lead writer, star, and producer, and the Goldbergs climbed in popularity. 1950, Gertrude Berg won the first ever Emmy for a female actor. The show was nominated for Best Kinescope. Kinescope, the best way I could describe it, is he's sitting right there filming the TV screen. You develop it and send it out to TV stations. She was also had a line of clothing for housewives. TV killed this radio star. She published a cookbook, And about 5 years ago, I was doing a talk in Elmont, New York at the Elmont Library. And one woman said, I have that cookbook. I still have it. I said, wow, that's got to be about 70 years old.
Or more.
Yeah, so I said to her, where'd you get it? She said, I stole it from the Brooklyn Library. The Elmont Library. I said, you stole it? Yeah. Well, what happened? Well, my boyfriend at the time, who became my husband, was drafted and he was leaving. And we didn't know if he was going to Korea or not. So on Friday night before he left, I wanted to cook as traditional a Jewish dinner as I could. So I took out the cookbook. He went away. He eventually would come back. But she never returned the book. I said, how come you didn't return the book? She said, I forgot. I said, how about all those overdue notices? She said, oh, I threw them away. I said, do you know how much money you owe the Brooklyn Public Library?
It's beautiful.
And she says, yeah, I never thought of that. Anyway, I said, what kind of condition is the book in? Well, it's held together by Scotch tape and a rubber band. She still had it. She was still using it. The television show is made into a movie called Molly by Paramount Pictures with Berg on the set in the editing room exerting. She was the screenwriter and producer. She did everything. She hired the actors. On radio, she did the radio deals. She got the sponsors. She hired the actors. She wrote the scripts. Nobody has done that. But she was blackballed during the McCarthy years. She supported her TV co-star Philip Loeb, who was accused of being a communist.
I remember
Loeb
that.
would commit suicide in 1955, a fatal overdose of sleeping pills. He was at the Taft Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, and Gertrude Berg's career was in tatters because she refused to surrender her friend. Floyd Gibbons was one of the first newspaper guys who went on radio. NBC Radio's Red Network broadcast his first program February 24th, 1930. He was a newspaper writer, and basically he was the announcer on the show. Lowell Thomas was on NBC and CBS. September 30th, 1930, he hosted his first CBS radio daily news broadcast. He was best known as a writer for chronicling the adventures of Lawrence of Arabia.
I got a story.
Yeah.
He was also a newsreel commentator
Yes.
at MGM.
Yeah, he was, I thought he was Foxtone.
Yeah.
Foxtone, anyway. Don McNeil, some people know who he is, some people don't. He had the longest running network radio show. It was called The Breakfast Club. It was out of Chicago. NBC Blue Network, ABC Radio, ran from June 23rd, 1933 through December 27th, 1968. 35 and a half years, more than Bob Barker on The Price is Right, more than Johnny Carson. The only guy who did more broadcasting was Alex Trebek, 37 plus years on Jeopardy when the show was in syndication. The comedian Fred Allen described McNeil saying this. He's a big, friendly fellow whose good nature pours through the microphone, and listeners react in the same way anyone reacts meeting him in person. He and the other settlers of radio established an intimacy that kept their audiences permanently loyal. Franklin Roosevelt did fireside chats. He went around the newspaper people, went on radio to explain to the nation why he was doing things. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, who's on first? And if it wasn't for the Kate Smith show, they might have just died. March 1938, Abbott and Costello signed to make their first microphone appearance as guests on the Kate Smith show. They were filling in for Henny Youngman, who discovered the duo. I'm going to give you this little story. Henny Youngman wanted to go to Hollywood to do a screen test for Paramount Pictures. Ted Collins, the band leader and producer of the show, and Kate Smith's partner, said, you can't do it unless you find a replacement. Okay, Henny Youngman goes to the Lowe State Theater, and Abbott and Costello are performing Who's On First. And because it's radio, he sat there, he closed his eyes and imagined this routine on radio and told Ted Collins, I got my replacement. But the producers weren't too thrilled with Who's On First.
Who's on first, what's
on
on second, I don't know who's on
third
third.
base.
Who
Third
doesn't
base.
give a damn?
Yeah, well, it depends on,
shortstop.
it depends on the skit. But they said, nah, no good, no good. The producers, I've dealt with too many radio producers who aren't very bright. So, okay, do that. The worst that can happen is it'll be forgettable. But March 24th, 1938, Who's on First became their signature sketch. Ed Morrow was not a news person. He was not a journalist.
He also didn't have a news show.
That's right.
Yeah, well, no, but he was not a journalist. He taught himself to be a journalist. And probably that's why he was so daring. This is London. Edward R. Morrow brought the war in Europe to the living rooms of Americans. His rooftop reports of the Blitz helped define broadcast journalism. Starting in 1939, his vivid reports explain the importance of developments in far-off countries, especially during the Blitz when Germany tried to bombard Britain into a submission. He brought the violence and the emotion of what was going on into American homes. You probably know John Charles Daly as the host of What's My Line in 1952.
I got a story.
Yeah, well,
He also
yeah,
described the events at Pearl Harbor
Yeah.
and the that the FDR.
yes.
Oh.
And also he was on the Today Show and ABC at the same time. Anyway, so here's John Charles Daly. And what's going on, CBS has a music show on. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. CBS interrupts the music show. Sounds like War of the Worlds. On December 7th, 1941, John Charles Daly reports, the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air. President Roosevelt just announced. The attack was also made on all military and naval activities on the principal island of Oahu. They go back to music. They go back to John Charles Daly. Go back to me. What are they going to do? That's all they could do. There's one of the 3 times I've been in Hawaii, the USS Arizona Monument. Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman.
George Reeves or
Yeah.
Chris Reeves.
So,
My cousin was Jerry Siegel.
yeah, I know that, Jerry Siegel, and I know that whole story that he got ripped off on this.
How did you know?
Yeah, because you've told me and I've read it. So anyway, the Superman, by the way, what is Superman? What brings his powers down? Kryptonite. Except your cousin didn't do that. There was no kryptonite then. Superman began as one of several anthology features in the National Periodic Publications comic book, Action Comics #1, June 1938. National launched the Superman comic in 1939, your cousin. Superman starred on radio in New York, WOR, February 12, 1940. Mutual Radio aired it nationally from August 31st, 1942 to February 14th, 1949. Superman. Well, he has superpowers on Earth because our sun is yellow. Krypton's sun was red. Kryptonite blocks the superpowers and its radiation is poisonous to Kryptonians, which can kill them. The writers on radio needed a storyline because the voice of Superman and Clark Kent, Bud Collyer, needed a vacation. He was working on about 7 or 8 different shows.
You also did quiz shows.
Yes, to tell the truth.
Oh.
So he needed a vacation. In an effort to give Bud Collyer some time off, a man in need of a vacation, the writers of the show invented kryptonite in 1943 in order to make Superman sick. This allowed the voice of Superman to be absent without ruining the regular broadcast schedule. And they didn't need Clark Kent. All they needed was basically an actor to go, see you in a couple of weeks, Bud. In the age of no reruns, it was one of radio's most popular shows. It was important to remain on the air without interruption, and a sick Superman allowed his voice to disappear and get some bed rest of his own. That would be Bud Collyer. In 1949, after your cousin is out, 1949, Superman 61 was featured, the first on-paper appearance of kryptonite. This is a cell from a Bugs Bunny cartoon. What's up, Doc? And Bugs Bunny is down and out, and Elmer Fudd's the great vaudevillian who needs a partner, and he goes down to Skid Row, and on Skid Row he sees Al Jolson and Jack Benny and Eddie Cantor and Bing Crosby, and tells Bugs Bunny, you have talent, not like these never-wases and has-beens. And the rest of the cartoon goes from there. The stars in the shows: Abbott and Costello, Fred Allen, Victor Borger, Jimmy Durante, Phil Harris, Bob Hope. The shows: Amos and Andy, Burns and Allen, Fibber McGee and Molly, the Goldbergs, the Great Gildersleeve. You Bet Your Life with Groucho starred on radio. The comics that came alive: Blondie, Dick Tracy, Gasoline Alley, The Gumps, Little Abner, Little Orphan Annie, Popeye the Sailor. Anybody have a secret decoder ring? If you have one today, it's worth $600, $700, $800. This is Captain Midnight's Secret Squadron. Little Orphan Annie, Decoder 1 was a fully functional hand-operated cipher disc shaped as a wearable badge, released in 1936 as a children's toy as part of a successful commercial sales promotion campaign for the milk supplement Ovaltine. How many of you had Ovaltine? How many of you liked it? That's about right.
I never thought it would fatten me up.
Yeah. Ovaltine never really tasted any good. Ovaltine sponsored Captain Midnight and other shows. Now, how the decoder worked? Well, there was a circle of numbers, 1 through 26, and there was the alphabet. So you had to match up the number they gave you with the letter in the alphabet, and the message was, drink Ovaltine. This is the Yonkers Library, and this is an area where they honor famous people who lived in Yonkers, like Sid Caesar and Ella Fitzgerald and Joe Lapchick, the basketball coach, and others. Edward Armstrong. He invented FM radio, but David Sarnoff was not happy with competition from FM because it was clear, and David Sarnoff and RCA successfully lobbied the FCC to move the FM spectrum from Armstrong's 40 to 60 megahertz to today's 88 to 108. The radio stays the same, doesn't change. That's the Scarborough Museum in LA. That move occurred on June 27, 1945, and it rendered Armstrong's Yankee radio network obsolete, and those who bought FM receivers on that frequency, well, you were stuck. You couldn't do anything. Armstrong was consumed by his work. Ultimately, it destroyed him. Patent litigations and battles with government regulators operating in collusion with Sarnoff and RCA to derail FM radio sapped his energy. Armstrong committed suicide in 1954. His inventions remain the core of radio technology. He went home one day, hit his wife, realized that he hit his wife, got in his car, drove to Manhattan, went to a hotel, parked the car, got the highest floor that he could find, and jumped out the window and committed suicide.
We were 2 years.
By 1946, the Dumont network was on. CBS and NBC, the radio networks have TV stations. Radio's on the verge of being pushed aside. Did television kill this radio star, Lucille Ball?
No.
She went on to the
Well, let me answer that
They made more
question.
money.
Let me answer that question. My favorite husband was her show. It was never supposed to be on. It was a test show. But our Miss Brooks wasn't ready on July 5th, 1948, and CBS said, you know what do we got to lose? Just throw it on, they'll fill up time. The worst thing is, nobody will remember it. But they got fan letters. People like that show. So within a month, that show is on. Lucille Ball and Lee Bowman played the title characters Liz and George Cugat. Cugat being Xavier Cugat, who discovered Desi Arnaz. So that's an ode to him. They got a positive response. Bowman was not able to do the show, so when it debuted later that month, Richard Deming took his place, and the show now that's going to be on changed the name from Cugat to Cooper, of the last name of the,
That guy, Richard Coogan, he was on 5-0.
Who? Richard Deming?
Yes.
Yep.
He
Did
played,
six-
Jack Webb's
I think the governor or something.
Yeah, that is Lucille Ball. She looked like somebody dipped her in red shoe polish. My Favorite Husband featured Lucille Ball opposite Richard Denning. The show was written by Jess Oppenheimer, Madeline Pugh, and Bob Carroll Jr. They were integral to the show's success. It jumps over to TV. 1950, CBS approached Lucille Ball. You know what? We want you on TV. She jumped at the chance, except she wanted Desi playing her husband on TV. That's a whole separate talk. My Favorite Husband ended in 1951, so TV did kill that radio star. Arthur Godfrey was probably the last network radio star from 1945 through 1972. Arthur Godfrey Showtime, or Time, featured monologues, interviews, music, and regular vocalists like him. Julius, well, you know, I knew Julius LaRosa from my days at WNEW Radio when I was 22 years old. He said he quit, and they fumbled the goodbye. And he was the only guy to visit Arthur Godfrey in the hospital on his deathbed, Julie. On October 19th, 1953, LaRosa was due to begin the TV portion of Godfrey's radio show, or TV show rather, waiting backstage until the final minutes of the radio-only part of the program. As he finished singing Manhattan, LaRosa and the audience heard Godfrey precede his sign-off by saying, "That was Julie's swan song with us." Julie changed the story later on. Godfrey said he fired him because he lacked humility, and he hired an agent. Well, radio's dead, really. It is really dead by 1955. When Monitor made its NBC radio debut on Sunday, June the 12th, 1955, traditional network radio with its half-hour and hour comedy, drama, and variety shows was in desperate shape. Television had stolen most of radio's audience, and it was clear that something new and different was needed. Sigourney Weaver, anybody know who she is? The actress?
Yes,
Okay.
Alien.
Her father, Sylvester Pat Weaver, had created the Tonight Show, and another show called Home with Arlene Francis on NBC. He came up with a format so audacious and grandiose, nothing ever was heard, nothing like it had ever been heard. It was called talk radio. Well, this is it. We're at the end of the era. That is Jack Benny with Bugs Bunny.
Right.
Or Sylvester the Cat, or Sylvester Jr., or George Spacely,
Or even,
or Woody Woodpecker. That is Mel Blanc. It's the end of an era. Goodbye, Jack Benny. It's November 22nd, 1955. The very last episode of the Jack Benny radio show features Mel Blanc as an interrupting sound effects man. Benny got his start on radio in the Ed Sullivan Show in 1932. From that, he got a regular series in 1932. The golden age is dead. A few programs continued, but it was all over but the shouting. On November 25th, 1960, the last 4 daytime radio dramas. Young Dr. Malone. Anybody watched the Sandy Becker Show on Channel 5 in New York as a kid?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. He was young Dr. Malone, Sandy Becker, at one point. Right to Happiness, the second Mrs. Burton and Ma Perkins, all broadcast on the CBS radio network, were canceled. Suspense is still hanging on. On September 30th, 1962, CBS aired a pair of radio shows that would conclude the golden age of radio. After 36 years, it's dead. Yours truly, Johnny Dollar, in Suspense, also known as radio's outstanding theater of thrills, said goodbye. So what's going on with radio today? Well, AM stations have gone off the air in various markets, including WFAS in White Plains, New York. I was doing another talk this morning about money in sports, and the call letters KQV radio in Pittsburgh came up. They used to do all news radio in Pittsburgh. Not only did they give up the format, they gave up their license. It's dead air. The AM band barely clings to life with suggestions that the band should disappear entirely. The electric vehicle car manufacturers have dropped AM radio because of interference. U.S. Congress is fighting the automakers. Radio stations used to be considered real estate, but not anymore. Most radio stations have little value, yet radio could be more reliable in an emergency or disaster than this, because radio could be powered artificially in that can, artificially
As
by
far as
batteries.
the FM, years ago, I had an old television.
Yeah, and you could
I had to
get
get a cable box, otherwise it would.
Yeah, it
cost
would
like
interfere
a
with
bit.
TV, yeah. So that's me in 1979 interviewing presidential candidate Jack Kemp. That's May of 1979, 23 years old. I doubt 23-year-olds are gonna interview a presidential candidate on the stump. That's when I started, when I was 15 on radio, WRKL radio, and then I graduated to television on MSNBC, and that's me at the age of 15 doing an interview with Bob Hyland of the New York Giants. 15 years old. I've been doing this a long time. Any questions, any comments? It is your turn to talk. Go ahead.